Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever and whenever you happen to be watching. This is Risuko in Tokyo coming at you with Empty Room Reviews, and we are finally taking a look at Little Witch Nobeta, developed by Pupia Games and Simon Creative, published by Just Dawn and Idea Factory International, with a September 2022 PlayStation 4 Asia release. And Little Witch Nobeta is a kind of Souls-like, but more of a shooter fantasy where we are following the story of the titular Little Witch, who, with the aid of a deeply unfriendly cat, is attempting to ascend the tower and claim the throne and unlock the mysterious mysteries of her past and existence. And it's pretty standard fare for what it is, but I had a really good time with it. I found the gameplay to be pretty zippy, quick, and fun, and I always appreciate that in games. I like the magic system. There's enough differentiation between the different magic attacks where it doesn't feel like they're just powered up reskins of things that you've already gotten. You've got a nice blaster with arcane. It's got a piercing on charge up. You've got a kind of a machine gun effect with ice that also does a tracking ice shards when you charge that up. Fires more like a grenade launcher and a literal boomstick with your melee getting powered up when it's on charge. And then there's thunder, and I deeply appreciate that these spells were needed for other obstacles and puzzles in the games, because once you get thunder, and in particularly in New Game Plus, it is so easy to crutch on because it is so very good. There is an absurd draw distance on it where you can just snipe things from across the map well before you're in their area of notice. You can call down the heavens on bosses and absolutely wreck their days. There's a really cool slowdown effect when you've got it charged up, so you can kind of cosplay as the Flash, and I found that to be really neat. So yeah, I basically used thunder exclusively once I got a hold of it, but the other spells, they are fun as well. You've got a double jump that you get with wind, and there's an optional teleporter spell that you can unlock as well. So yeah, I felt that the magic system was pretty decently handled. Combat is pretty forgiving. It's pretty generous. I didn't really feel like it was all that difficult. There's two little spikes with the early bosses. Tanya's a bit tough until we got her patterns down, and Monica just realizing that she's got an area effect when she gets later into the fight on her attacks. Once we got that understood, it wasn't really that much of a difficulty. There was only one general combat area in the game where I felt like I was a bit overwhelmed. You've got this arena when you get the ice spell, and there's just like a lot of enemies in there. There's really too many to effectively tank at that level. You've got to play with a bit of finesse, but there is a walkway above that arena where you can snipe enemies and thin out the crowd before you actually jump down into it and do it, and that made it an awful lot easier. Now, I do need to be upfront that I played on standard difficulty, which is kind of like this game's very easy mode. It's a bit weird like that. Advanced is a little bit tougher. I did play it on Advanced for a bit. You don't get the MP regen that you get in Standard, and you do need to rely a little bit more on the parry, because the parry gives you MP regen when you pull it off correctly. It's a running joke in streams that I just can't play defensively, and I can't play with timing, and I can't play with finesse. So I did struggle with that, and I kind of capped out once I got to the Tanya fight. She did in fact wipe the floor with me, but I had a really fun time playing on Standard, and unless you're looking for more of a challenge, Standard is probably a fairly good fit for you. Now, moving into the story, and this is where I feel like the game starts to develop some relatively glaring problems, and there are going to be pretty big spoilers, of course, from this point on. So if you haven't played, I do suggest that you give it a run. It's just about 12 hours. You'll have a good time with it. Nobeta is a fun game. Now, there's a big twist in this story, and the twist is that you are not, in fact, playing as Nobeta. You are playing as Noneta. Noneta is a crafted soul. She's kind of like the remnants of this process of ripping Nobeta's soul out of her body that the church does, and she develops consciousness at some point prior to the game, I guess. We don't really get enough backstory on any of these characters. We're going to talk about that in a little bit, but she's compelled to figure out what's going on with her life and going into the tower. Now, I had assumed that Nobeta was the cat. The highly antagonistic, really doesn't like you, seems like, cat. And that added a lot of interesting complexities and like moral dimensions to the story in my mind, because I was wondering, like, at what point does Nobeta in the cat realize that Noneta is actually a person, and she is still willing to sacrifice her? Like, it seems like that comes before they get to the throne, but she's still willing to sacrifice her to get her body back, and it made me wonder, like, what are the devs trying to say about how we process trauma, and when is it okay to sacrifice somebody, and is Nobeta a good person to the extent that what that means? And it really kind of troubled me, and it was running through my mind, and I actually did another video. This is the second one, because I completely fucked up, because Nobeta is not the cat. Nobeta is the chair. The cat is Nobeta's devoted familiar. And you may be saying, Risuko, they tell you that. The cat says that directly, and I thought, honest to goodness, I thought that this was Nobeta playing some kind of chess where she didn't want to destroy the personality construct that was in Noneta by revealing the truth before she got to the throne and could get, sacrificed to get Nobeta's body back. And so she just made up a lie on the fly. Oh, I'm actually the familiar. But no, that's the familiar. She tells us that directly, and that completely changes the moral dynamic of the story, I feel like, in some less interesting ways, but at least it sits a little bit easier in some aspects, because when you look at it from Nobeta's perspective, and she's in the chair, and it's heavily implied that, like, she doesn't really know anything that's going on while she's there. She doesn't know what's going on in the world. So she wakes up in the chair, she's in her mind palace, and it's infested with enemies, and she's got to get to the seat of her power. She gets to the seat of her power, and there's this sad girl sitting in it, and it's like, well, that's a real shame, but I do have to kill you, and I don't know who you are. You're just here, so I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to smack you. And, like, it doesn't make it seem like she's a murderous bitch. It just makes it seem like she's run into another obstacle, and she doesn't have any knowledge about the, personality of this obstacle for the most part. It makes it kind of interesting that she does choose to give Noneta life back at the end. So that was, it's a much more straightforward story than I gave it credit for, and I think that is a little bit to its detriment. Now, it does kind of shift the moral calculus over to the cat, over to the familiar, and it makes me wonder a lot, like, when the devs use that term familiar, and like, what definition are they working from? Because familiars have existed in, in European mythology, and they've been incorporated into a lot of fantasy settings, and there's a pretty broad spread of, like, some familiars are just basically pets with perks. They're a little bit more clever, but they're not, like, human clever. And then you've got things like in Sabrina the Teenage Witch, where the Salem is just talking and it has its own personality. But I'm wondering, like, can familiars tell their masters to fuck off? Because now it's framed as, like, our familiar, our cat, I'm just going to call her Cat, is so devoted, so loves Nobeta, and wants to get her friend back. But is she a friend? Like, is this a compulsion because she's a familiar and she doesn't have free will and agency? Or, could she make the decision to say, hey, I really want my friend back, but also we're going to be killing this little girl, because that's the plan, to do it, and maybe that's not so great, maybe we shouldn't do that, and she decides to do it anyways. So that does add a bit of an interesting moral calculus to it, but she does fucking die at the end. So that robs a little bit from it, because, like, the person who is bearing responsibility for this is dead. So does it matter? I mean, it does in the real world, but does it matter in the game? I'm not entirely sure. Now, I did mention that Noneta does get life back, and on one hand, like, that's good, because I really liked Noneta. She's neat. She's a bit of a moe blob, but she's designed to be liked, and I did kind of like her. But it's also a little bit unsatisfying, because now we have been playing up until, like, the 3/4 mark. We've been playing as Noneta, and we've been, encouraged to identify with her, and her quest is our quest. And the answer ultimately to her quest is that she's not real. And it feels like it would have been a bit of a more, like, narratively fulfilling conclusion if she had somehow won against Nobeta, and she had earned the right to exist. But, like, because we've been shifted into Nobeta's shoes, and that really can't happen. Like, the structure of games requires the protagonist to win, and the protagonist is Nobeta now, which is, to me, it's a bit unsatisfying, because while I was saying that Nobeta doesn't know anything about the situation, and so she's not really morally culpable for what's going on, it's all being done to her, we as players also don't really know anything about Nobeta. And, like, we get very little internality on Nonida, but we have even less on Nobeta, so, like, we're suddenly supposed to identify with this character, and her success in getting her body back is supposed to be, like, the big culminating point, but it's not, to me, ultimately, and it's a bit of a shame, and it's a bit of a letdown. I don't want to say that I liked my version better, but it was definitely something that made me think a lot more about what the devs were trying to say. And I do still kind of wonder, on a broader point, like, what are the devs getting at here? And it feels very much like, dealing with trauma, and, like, how we handle that, and how we handle who we were as produced by trauma, and as opposed to, like, who we become after we've kind of recovered from it. If we look at Nonita as, and this is what I'm not sure about, like, do we view Nonita as a separate entity? Like, within the confines of the game, within the world of the game, yes, clearly, and she does get her life back at the end. She's put in the body of the cat, which is a cat girl, so she's got a girl's body, and she moves on with her life, but, like, as what she represents, because it feels like if she represents something that is a separate thing, it feels almost like alters. People who are systems and have alters that develop through trauma, and those alters, like, still deserve respect. They still have agency, they still have internality that we have to validate, and we have to find ways to exist in tandem with our alters. But if she's not a separate thing, if she's, like, dealing with the trauma in one way, and then she gets life, though, at the end, and it felt to me a little bit like, on my very, very first blush of a reading, being a trans woman, and who we are before we recognize that we are trans. And that aspect of ourselves does have validity, and did exist in a life, had joys and sorrows and tragedies and failures and successes, but once we come to realize who we are, we have to move beyond that. Like, we can accept and recognize that existed, but to let it continue to have life feels very, very weird to me. And so I was viewing it in a system alter sense. And I don't know if that's the best view, but it is, like, the most coherent, I guess. But I don't know what the devs were going for with that. And it's really hard to tell, like, in some aspects, like, what the devs were going for, because, like, so much of the information about this world is hidden in lore. But I want to talk about that in a second. I want to move on to presentation. And now, I did like the presentation of this game for the most part. On a technical level, it's really quite good. Like, the textures are really nice. The structure of the environment is decent. Like, it has coherent sense as a castle. I thought the enemy designs were like, the general enemy designs, relatively basic, but they work for what they're doing. They don't look terrible. The actual character designs, like folks who have speaking lines, like the bosses and Nonida and Nobeta, also they looked really great. There was, it was kind of interesting, I found, with, like, Tanya and Monica, because they are supposed to be crafted souls that are being used by the church that are developing consciousness, and from the church's perspective, it feels like consciousness would be a bad thing. So the fact that they have very individualized designs as a player is really, really neat, but as a story point, it feels like the church would maybe go for something a little bit more uniform to discourage their building their own personalities, but that's a side point. I did read a review that claimed that the game was all fan service and everybody was showing skin and it was just without taste, and that was a bit of a weird read to me because it's really, really not like that. Like, okay, there's Vanessa and Vanessa's tits who kind of count as their own side character, and I can get it if you've got an allergy to that, but like the other bosses and the other costumes for Nobeta, like they don't really have that vibe. The Necromancer costume, by the way, is the best costume. You've got a skull hat, it's fucking great. I could see if you were really looking for something to be gross, you might be able to find it in the swimsuit outfit, but like it's really not that bad, and it has the best hat, and it's got the best bag, so it's hard for me to complain about that. Now, the environment, though, is where I find my biggest issues, because while it is a decent, coherent environment, and while it is, like, it's textured very nice, and it does look like a castle, it is so fucking empty. Like, there is nothing in there. There's no decoration, there's no tapestries, there's no furniture, there's no instruments, there's nothing there that, like, tells you what the purpose of this castle was and who was living here. You kind of find that out through the lore bits, and the lore bits are all shoved aside in this item menu, and I hate it. It's so non-diegetic, and it robs those lore bits of like any real sense of importance or connection to the environment and to the world, because you're always stepping out from the world to access this menu and to read through all these lore bits. And they tell you that this was, you know, this castle was used by the church. By the way, super cartoonishly evil, this church. They're engaged in multiple genocides, and they're just basically subjugating all the people under them. And that seems like it should have been something that was in the game a little bit more. They talk about the church a bit, but not too much. But like, you've got you've got objects in there that they could have put in the environment to give us a sense of like what was going on. Like, you've got all these manacles and implements of torture, and they tell us that it's because that they were used to create these crafted souls in this laboratory castle thing. Well, why not put them in an area? Why not put them like in a room or a series of rooms that got all these manacles and have got all these torture implements, and then you as a player could imagine, oh, I bet this is where they made the crafted souls. I bet really bad shit happened here. And then you go and examine them, because they do all have image files. All of them in the items bit have an image associated with them. Also, those item bits are all voice acted, which is like way harder than they needed to go. I do kind of feel like they should have put that somewhere else, the money and time that they used to make that, but you know, whatever, set that aside for the moment. But you could have put them in the environment, let the player put two and two together, and then maybe examine these objects in the environment, and I don't know, do like a small cutscene, just with static poses even, where the cat explains to you what's on the wall, because you've got the voice files right there anyway, so you could use them that way. And it would have just been so much better for telling the story of this world and giving us a little bit more about these characters, to have it represented in the environment. Your games are interactive visual media, and I feel like Nobeta is just like not really using one of the major strengths of that form, and it's a real shame. But moving on to streamability and replayability, and considering how much I just ragged on it in the story and the presentation sections, I thought this was really great from a streaming standpoint. I had a lot of fun. There was really, really good energy in chat. We did have one weirdo, which is more than usual. Generally we get 0 weirdos, but it wasn't really a problem because we banned him pretty quick, so, you know, sucks to be him. But otherwise, like, yeah, people seem to enjoy the game, and I enjoyed the game because we played it on standard. It gave me the chance to, like, show off a little bit more than I would have been if I had played it on advanced and been struggling a lot more with it. I always do worry with games that I struggle with, that like the frustration will come through, and then the chat won't be having a good time and I won't be having a good time, but I want to have a good time and I want chat to have a good time. So this really worked for that. Like, it was a bit shorter than I generally like in games that I stream. It's only 4 sessions, and I generally like 6 to 8, but that's okay. It was long enough that we were able to have a good time with it. But coming back to it on my own, and I really didn't feel the drive for that. It didn't really have high replayability, and it's one of the reasons why this video took so long, is because I knew I was going to have to play through it again to get B-roll footage, and I wasn't really interested. I feel like I'd gotten everything I needed from it in one playthrough. I don't feel like I have to challenge myself with games, doing them on harder modes to get like the full experience of the game. If I had a good time, I had a good time, and that was enough. Now there is a tower challenge that you can play that I didn't go into because I heard that I read that it hinges a lot more on the parry mechanic, and as we discussed, I'm shit at the parry mechanic, so I was like, maybe I don't really want to get into that. So for me personally, relatively low replayability, but if it's something that, like, if you really click with the systems, I think you could get a lot of fun out of it. I know that Kronos loves it an awful lot, so, you know, give it a shot, see what you feel. And how do we feel about Nobeta as a totality? And it's an orange diamond. Honestly, it's not a great game. It's got flaws, not as deep as I thought on my first read through, but it definitely does have flaws that are there. I hated the fact that the way that you get the lore is that it's all frickin' sparkles on the ground that you've got to break barrels to pick up. Like, I don't have any desire to do that because there's nothing else in those barrels except for HP regen, and I don't need it because I'm playing on standard, so it just felt like wasted time to me. And that was a big point. But like, it's also not a terrible game. Like, these flaws are not so deep that I feel like you couldn't have a good time with it. I really appreciated the fact that Kronos brought this to my attention because it was a really fun experience to have with people in stream. I just don't think it was a great experience, and playing it outside the context of stream is something that I probably would have struggled a little bit more to find enjoyment in. But I think that pretty much does it here. I've talked for like way too long, and I'm so sorry about that. I want to give special shout outs to Kronos for helping me work through some ideas on the story and letting me know that I'd screwed it up my first time through. Also to Hive. Hive, I didn't talk about the Dead Space stuff, but maybe I will on some other occasion. But that does have to do it for us here at This Go About. So from me, Risuko, to all of you out there, wherever you may happen to be, thank you, arigato, sayonara, see you, and ciao.